Good morning and welcome to the Daily Cyber Briefing for Monday, the 7th of October. I'm Stephen Ridgway. Draytech has released patches for 14 vulnerabilities. These vulnerabilities cover 24 router models and include a critical buffer overflow flaw that could allow remote code execution or denial of service attacks. The vulnerabilities were identified by Forescouts research labs and are, basically patches are available for these. So would encourage you to take a look and update if you can. Notably, less than 3% of exposed Draytech devices are up to date with firmware. So the versions including up to and including 3.8.9.2, which is a 6-year-old firmware, is still common out there. So if you are using or responsible for Draytech devices, then very sensible thing to do would be to look at getting updated ASAP. To put it in context, Forescout has analysed around 700,000 exposed connected devices with these flaws. So definitely not a good state at the moment. If you're running Draytech stuff, patch. Okay, so a Chinese group has been identified as having compromised networks by Verizon Communications, AT&T, and Lumen Technologies, including the infrastructure that is used to comply with US court requests for wiretapping, as in monitoring monitoring network traffic at a carrier level. So just in case you're not aware, when a court says says that yes, traffic can be monitored in that way, basically there is quite substantial infrastructure that's been put aside by law enforcement and security services in order to do that. This stuff tends to sit in like the major internet hubs and data centers for the big providers, at least, or at least allegedly it does. One could never point at something and say, "Oh, I bet that belongs to MI5." But there we are. Now, if that infrastructure has been compromised, that basically means that the attackers have the ability to monitor all the traffic, all traffic that's going through that particular telco's network. Now, in this particular case, the group that has been identified as being responsible for this is Salt Typhoon, which is a Chinese group who is mainly interested or motivated by intelligence gathering. One of the things, I know we've spoken a bit about this, but it is worth reiterating. Modern nation states adversaries, especially the Chinese, are very interested in just hoovering up data. They are less concerned primarily with what that data is. Just having it may prove to be useful later. And as we spoke about last week, with the increasing likelihood that quantum computing will be usable in the not too distant future. Hoovering up data, even if it's encrypted now, could well be very useful in the future. So this is particularly worrying. Now, what bothers me is that at least 3 major telcos have been compromised, and they will be. There is a high probability that they are running independent infrastructure for the use of security services. It kind of indicates to me that there are some underlying architectural problems around how this stuff is accessed and used that have led to the ability for a Chinese group to access this stuff. Also raises the questions around it kind of lifts the lid a little bit on the fact that there's all sorts of stuff going on by our own security forces that we're probably not aware of. And yes, no matter how much that's used for legitimate purposes by the agencies that have requested this stuff, the fact that it is there means it can be misused. And this is a fundamental problem with giving government agencies sweeping rights and abilities to go looking for stuff. You can argue whether we should or shouldn't trust our own security services to have access to all sorts of things about us. I think given the appalling behaviour from the police in the UK during lockdowns, giving them access to data that they don't need is not a good thing at all. However, you've got to balance that against using this stuff for real crime fighting, which is I think, absolutely justified. But the difficulty is that there's no history of this stuff being well protected and immune to attacks. So you're kind of creating the infrastructure for adversaries to use in order to attack us. Yeah, very curious. Don't know what the answer to this one is, but it is worth being aware of that. And just bear in mind then that your data may be being hoovered up in like off the internet, off the public networks, and that includes point-to-point, by the way. Stuff. So yeah, you know, even if you were really old-fashioned and had leased line stuff, it still passes through telco networks and can be intercepted in that way. So consider some of the ensuring that some of the principles around traffic encryption in transit they're built into the architecture, protecting things. Risk-based, obviously, business risk based is important. Some data doesn't matter if it's hoovered up, but generally, I think generally, in my opinion, it's often harder to work out what you need to protect and what you need to, or what you can not bother with protecting, and then running two different ways of transporting it around is probably more trouble than just saying, well, okay, let's aim to protect all of it. Anyway, worth thinking about. Okay, and finally then from me for today, I came across a good article in Cybersecurity News that talks about session hijacking surges. So to put this stuff in context, session hijacking has been around for a long time. If anybody's done any of these sort of SANS offensive courses, will have spent time learning how to, pass the hash and cookie grabbing and all sorts of other things. To some extent, that's been, in the real world, that's been seen as being an awful lot more hard work than simply getting hold of somebody's password. Because obviously, if you've got access to the account through misusing legitimate processes, the need for doing all this clever stuff it is less. Well, it's less. There is less need. It's less important. Now, one of the things that's happened as MFA and stronger authentication mechanisms have become more widely adopted. Firstly, there's a focus on how do you subvert these things, as in the sort of lookalike sites that trick you into putting in your password and your MFA code that are then used in real time to access the actual service. But the other side of it is then, well, rather than going to a lot of trouble to try to attack the account authentication process one way or another, attackers have gone back to, well, let you log on and then steal your session information in such a way as you can be, to impersonate you. Now, given that a lot of services are provided by the web and are accessed through browsers, cookie stealing and other bits and pieces are increasingly common methods of impersonating you. So you don't have to worry about trying to breach the account. Wait till the user's logged on and then steal the cookies required in order to completely bypass authentication and gain access to the accounts. So one area which is increasingly targeted are the unmanaged, they're accessing corporate accounts via unmanaged personal devices, which is the using your mobile phone to access your work email, being a good example, where there is a sync of profiles between then your apps on your device and corporate apps. Those kind of cookies are not well protected at the moment. So info stealers are increasingly looking at getting this information from a mobile device that allows an attacker then to impersonate you as a logged in active current session. One of the reasons why this is effective is because mobile devices, EDR on mobile devices is not as advanced as EDR on laptops and so on, so forth. So mobile devices, I think, are going to see an uptick in focus from attackers over the next 12 months or so, as this particular method becomes more widely available, more widely used. It still requires a certain amount of compromise. So, we are still looking at what vulnerabilities are available on these devices, but mobile device vulnerabilities, it is definitely worth keeping on top of this stuff. And I think that we'll also see an improvement in endpoint protection for mobile devices. there's some good, there's some perfectly decent stuff out there, but I don't, like as I say, I don't think it's at the same level as the sort of stuff that you run on your laptop. So yeah, definitely worth being aware of these things, because EDR isn't necessarily picking this stuff up. It is worth thinking about things like rules for concurrent logged-in sessions, rules around the geography of logged-in sessions, so you can generally pull useful monitoring information out of your cloud provider's environments, and so it is, I would suggest, worth having a little look at that stuff and seeing what alerts it would be worth configuring for your SIEM or your security visibility tool. Anyway, that's enough from me for today. I hope you have a good start to the week, and I will speak to you again tomorrow morning.